What if we knew everything behind the scenes of the killing of Navalny? We might be surprised, not just by Putin's vengeance and by his pettiness, but also by his superstitiousness and his alleged fancy for occult ritual. This will be one of our 4 takeaways today, but first, let's look at the people who turned out for Navalny's funeral. The folks who were there, and the many more who weren't, feel not just politically, but personally about this. There's such a thing in Russia as the Navalny generation, and a lot of young people in particular feel themselves to be part of that. Here are some of them throwing flowers at the hearse carrying Navalny's body, and here are some of them shouting "No to war" and "Putin is a K word." To these people, the picture of Navalny in his coffin looks like it must be photoshopped. It looks unreal. They feel about it that it's not believable because that's our future dead. A lot of them do feel the same way about Bucha and the 77 other calamities that Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine inflicted on the innocent people of Ukraine. But don't forget, these supporters of Navalny are part of perhaps a section of 20-25% of the Russian population who vehemently oppose Putin's project. That doesn't apply to the rest of the population. The depoliticized blob in the middle in Russia, in fact, aren't in denial about Bucha. What they feel, rather, is, oh my word, this is so terrible, I'm not going to go there, because that would mean me realizing that the relationship with politics that I elaborated for myself over the past couple of decades has ended in such a calamity that I can't possibly face where it's ended up. Let's now turn to the killing of Navalny and to Putin's mysticism. The killing of Navalny is not just what happened in that northern penal colony called Polar Wolf. It's that, but it's also Navalny's transfer there. It is the taking of his life there, but it's also the taking hostage of his body, the abuse of his mum, the obstruction of the funeral, the cutting off of the internet during the funeral, the insertion potentially of government agents into the crowd to try to orchestrate a provocation. We're getting reports that they were trying to get the crowd to march on the Kremlin. It's the exclusion from the funeral of Navalny's close friends and above all his kids and his wife. The killing of Navalny is that process put together over which Putin presided and which was curated by Putin's occult and mystical instincts. And what we've got to understand is that all of that stuff that's going on in Putin's head also controls his foreign policy. Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine is part of a wider escalation against the West that is conditioned by mystical visions in 2 ways. First of all, Putin has largely come to think of himself as a single individual in whose soul is embodied the destiny of a culture. And that mystical vision is attached to a kind of mystical sense of duty he has, which tells him that he has got to deliver Russia in a single swoop, preferably, from the back row of nations somewhere to the front. And then that is possible because of a kind of historically inevitable collapse, and just indeed collapse, of the West. Our third takeaway is that we don't do good if we completely separate, for all of Navalny's flaws, Navalny's struggle against the Putin regime and Ukraine's struggle against the deranged imperial mania that has broken into Ukrainian homes for over a decade and in the form of a full-scale invasion for over 2 years now. Ukraine only wins completely if a politicization of the Russian and Belarusian space occurs and the deranged imperial authoritarian mania there is chased out. That's why criticism of coverage of Navalny as something that distracts us from Ukraine is a misunderstanding. And it's worse than a misunderstanding. It's depoliticization. Ironically, it shows us that the deep depoliticization on Russian soil isn't a unique occurrence. It's an extreme manifestation of a global political malaise that affects us all. Navalny is not a cereal box that we've got to like or dislike. He's a political actor who is politicizing the Russian space, and that is of interest to us, inevitably, because we are interested in brutal imperial mania not emanating from there. If you want to know more on this, there is a video from 2 weeks ago on Navalny on this channel. But now let's turn to our fourth takeaway: Russia's progressive slide toward mass terror. Russia is not at the end or even in the middle, it's at the beginning of a series of totalitarian turns that are going to occur more and more rapidly over the years to come. Isaiah Berlin, writing many decades ago, called the period 1848 till 1855, when Tsar Nicholas I eliminated all opposition and heterodoxy, the darkest hour in the night of 19th century Russian obscurantism. Something even worse happened in the 30s. And what is hard to believe for most Russians today, but it's true, is that Russia is moving in that direction now. Increasingly, the regime will turn not just on its opponents, but on people who do not support it vocally. This will require politicizing a depoliticized population to some extent. One relief for the world here is that this is a dangerous process for the regime, which it could get wrong. And abroad, that regime won't stop at any barrier until it crashes into it. It's in our interests to make these barriers strong, but that does not guarantee that the gang in the Kremlin won't try to break through. Much of this desire to break through and upturn the world and take Russia to the front row of nations is driven by a missionary and mystical turn that Putin developed between 2010 and 2014. A part of that was an obsession that he cultivated with Tsar Alexander III. And to understand more about that, watch this video next.